So thank you very much, Simon, Stuart and Sheila. And I'm now going to hand over to Sheila, who is going to who's going to chair the next session on the impact of Brexit on our industry. So Sheila, with immaculate planning, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. We're now moving on to talk about the impact that Brexit has had on our industry. We're going to hear 3 presentations and we'll take questions after the presentations, but please submit your questions as you think of them using Slido. Our first presentation is from Claire Williams, the Executive Director and Secretary of the British Equestrian Trade Association. Claire's going to talk to us about the impact from a trade, business and retail perspective. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Sheila. Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen. In June 2016, the UK voted to leave the European Union. Following several false starts, we officially left the single market on the 31st of January 2020, entering the transition period which ended at midnight of the 31st of December last year. Following a year of challenges posed by the impacts of the coronavirus, the timing for many companies was by no means ideal. I am one of those rare individuals that can still remember what it was like to trade in a pre-single market world. Working out of Germany in the early 1990s, I imported New Zealand origin products for distribution throughout Europe and the UK before the single market came into play in 1993, even before the Channel Tunnel opened in 1994. I was familiar with terms such as bonded goods, customs warehouses, carnets, and had the joy of dealing with commodity codes, terms of trade such as CIF and FOB, and customs entries. These skills have largely lain dormant since then, until on the 1st of January this year, they were reawakened with a vengeance. For many companies, however, this export and importing terminology has had to be learned quickly as they realised that to keep their customers in Europe, they had to learn from scratch how to trade with a market that for nearly 30 years was considered and largely treated as an extension of their domestic market. Europe has now become a market, or rather group of markets, to which we formerly export to and import from, and which now demand skill sets that for many are totally new. But surely many will say, we knew what was coming. Sadly not. Whilst being warned of impending Brexit, the promise of a deal meant that many companies largely put off any preparation. They did this for 2 reasons, apart of course from the coronavirus hitting the country last year. One was that without detail, they didn't know what precisely they would need to prepare for. And secondly, there was a continuing hope that a trade deal would be done to mitigate what needed to be prepared for. This deal, we were told, would mean that we would be able to continue frictionless trade as before. Sadly, however, what the negotiators and government thought this to mean was different to what we now know it to be. The deal that was negotiated and enshrined in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, or the TCA, was not the Christmas present that most people thought it was or would have wished for. The TCA, all 1,246 pages of it, sets down in detail the terms under which the UK and Europe will continue to deal with each other, and covers not only the free trade conditions, but details much more. This ranges from rules of origin that have to be met to qualify for zero tariff treatment, to packaging rules, GDPR, labelling, documentation, recognition of professional qualifications, and the basis on which you can live and work and visit both markets. For many of the trade, it has actually had a greater impact on their businesses to date than some experienced during the ups and downs of last year. There were issues with some stock due to interrupted supply chains for finished product and componentry, an issue that is still faced today and has exacerbated issues caused by Brexit. Exports from the UK equestrian trade, excluding horses or vehicle sales, amount to over £500 million per annum. Over half of this is estimated to be sold into Europe. In addition to this, there are the millions of pounds of retail sales from UK-based online businesses also destined for Europe. In a letter to the Minister written by the British Horse Council last year, we pointed out that the future international successes of the UK equestrian industry require trade agreements that minimise any tariff and non-tariff barriers. The manufacturing arm of the sector needed to secure ongoing availability of raw materials and ingredients to retain its strength. Where these commodities cannot be grown or sourced in the UK, the costs of importing them should not jeopardise UK-based business and trade. Sadly, the deal does not appear to have fulfilled either of these key criteria, or at least this is the experience to date. As a result of Brexit, we have seen the loss of unfettered access to our single largest market and have seen firsthand how this has impacted on the trade. For the supply sector, the impact has been multiple. In terms of exports, companies have been faced with having to provide a vast and often confusing array of additional documentation, requirements for which seem to exceed those needed to export to other, often more difficult markets. Invoices are now almost encyclopedic in nature, with the ORI number, commodity codes, net and gross weight of each individual item ordered, and of course the all-important statement of origin. Regardless of who exports the goods, the documentation still has to be produced by the exporter. To add to the difficulty, the reality has dawned that although covered by one trade agreement, we're actually supplying to 27 different markets with different VAT rates and import documentary requirements, which have to be confirmed before export and which face different interpretations at border crossings. This latter point has caused the feed industry particular headaches, with different officials in the same country demanding different documents. We've seen demands for export health certificates where none are available, and phytosanitary certificates demanded where none should be required. A similar situation exists for exports of PPE, i.e. safety equipment. The familiar CE mark will continue to have to be placed on product entering the EU, whilst within the UK it will be replaced with the UK CA mark, adding another layer of cost to manufacturers that will need to be passed on to the consumer. Double or even triple duty is now becoming an unforeseen reality and consequence of the change status, and will become a factor in pushing prices up. When product enters Europe from a third country such as China, duty is levied on the value of the shipment. When sold onto the UK, the expectation was that the goods would be treated as if coming from Europe with no further duty to be paid. This sadly is not the case, so that when that product enters the UK, duty is in fact levied once again as if it was coming from a third country. If a retailer then sells the same product onto Ireland, for example, duty is then levied for what will be the third time on the same products. The same applies to goods entering under free trade agreements that both the UK and Europe are signed up to. Unless the goods being traded between us are either UK or EU in origin, preferential free access simply doesn't apply. This is significant not just for finished product, but also for the vast range of raw materials destined for the feed and manufacturing sectors, which have traditionally often been landed in North European hubs such as Rotterdam, to be broken up and shipped throughout Europe. Whilst we're experiencing much short-term pain and added costs as shipments are being lost for upwards of 6 weeks before being returned to the shipper, there are likely to be longer-term consequences as customers turn to easier options for sourcing and potentially resulting in the loss of sales. At a time when many in the supply sector are already facing low stock levels of both finished goods and raw materials, their cost base is increasing. A widely reported consequence of the international nature of the pandemic was the shortage of containers in the right place at the right time for the shipping of goods and raw materials around the world. The effect on freight costs alone saw a 20-foot container coming out of China that cost around $2,500 in March last year, now costing $14,000. These additional costs drastically change the cost base of many products. Retailers too have been impacted upon in all directions, taking on the role as they are of importer and exporter and involving an entirely new knowledge set, leading to added cost, increased administrative burdens and a potential loss of customers. In some reported cases, deliveries are having charges levied at 100% of the shipment value, despite duty and VAT combined only amounting to 22 to 30%. Often couriers were demanding cash on delivery, and other than refusing it, were often on goods on which customers were waiting. Retailers had no choice but to pay and then try to decipher the calculation. Businesses established on the single market model are having to be substantially remodelled due to the new rules. As part of the EU, VAT is charged at point of sale, bringing with it some advantages in supply. Companies selling product rated with zero VAT in the UK have established good markets for these in parts of Europe where the destination VAT is considerably higher, up to 25%. Now, post-Brexit, the customer faces an immediate 25% price hike due to VAT now being collected in the country of destination. So for retailers wishing to maintain these markets, they will now need to register for VAT in each of the EU markets they're selling into and substantially redesign their IT structures. The equestrian trade is meeting these new challenges as well they can, and are slowly overcoming them. But with delays, frustrations and inconsistency, it is taking longer than we certainly envisaged. Some of the solutions are still being worked on, but for the future of our trade, it's important that we persist due to the significant part that the European market holds for so many of our companies. For many, this means as well a fundamental change in the way many conduct their business. We knew that the transition was never going to be an easy one, but some of us thought that it might be slightly easier than it has been to date. To end on a positive note, as companies settled into the new routine, the process will, it is hoped, become clearer and easier to operate with. As new trade deals are made, new export markets will open up. Japan, for example, has exciting opportunities for the equestrian sector, and if the efforts to become a part of the Pacific Rim Trade Agreement are successful, then access to 10 further markets, including Canada and Australia, could be secured. The challenges that many retailers are overcoming to source their product from Europe and the lessons learned can be put to good effect in looking further afield to source product directly from markets that previously may have been seen as daunting. There is a glimmer of light at the end of the horizon, but it seems only to be getting brighter very, very slowly. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. We're now going to move on to look at the impact of Brexit on hauliers, and we're delighted to have Henry Bullen, the Director of Peden Bloodstock, with us. As a reminder, please submit your questions as you think of them and we'll deal with them later. Thanks, Henry.
Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked to come today and discuss the impact of Brexit on our industry, and specifically relating to the shipping industry. I think probably my two least favourite words in the English language currently would be COVID and Brexit. And I think that's probably the same across the board for everybody. But let's talk about Brexit today. So on the 23rd of June 2016, I'm sure we can all remember that day when we woke up the next morning and 17.4 million people in the UK had voted to leave the EU. I don't think we were quite sure what that meant. What we did happen is there were 4.5 years of limited information going on whilst the Brexit negotiators were playing deal or no deal. The information was sketchy, would be, I think, probably an understatement. But then near the end of last year, we suddenly got this: stand by, change is coming. Well, I think we all knew that change was coming. And we also knew that the 31st of December was going to be the day that we would be not looking forward to, but looking at in anticipation. And then just before Christmas, I think we found that we're a bit like these mountain goats, up on a ledge, not quite sure how we got there, but also not quite sure how we're going to get down again. our expectations, or at least the expectations that have been published, were that these massive queues getting to the docks, lots of operation stacks and blocks being put in place so that there were parking facilities for vehicles, Manston Airport on the M20, you name it, it was all happening. And we all in the equine industry stressed to our clients and everyone in the equine industry not to travel in the first 2 weeks of January, because simply we didn't quite know what was going to transpire. But in reality, this is what happened. Very few people travelled, and it all ran reasonably smoothly. There was lots in the press regarding the delays for the fish and other industries, but also the equine industry were very slow to move forward. So definitely people who wanted to travel, and there were people who went in the first couple of weeks. And the reason why we're also concerned about travelling is because of the confusion involved. There was so much that needs to be done and understood. So the current position is this. First off, it's certainly more complicated than taking a horse from the UK to the USA, despite the fact we're only popping across a small stretch of water. It's more time consuming than taking a horse from the United Kingdom to the USA. Not quite as costly, but it's not far off by the time you've taken everything into account. It's definitely more stressful on both human and horse. And the impact on the environment is not necessarily greater, but it's certainly greater than it was when we travelled to the European Union. Simply, I'd say it's a bureaucratic headache. We have a free trade agreement, but still we have to complete customs, and in some cases there is still taxes to be paid. So let's look at the process of how we move horses now. The first step is that the client would contact their shipping agent as soon as they have any insight into the fact they might travel, because there's so much to be done that time is of the essence. You want to be contacting your vet immediately, because firstly, your vet has to be able to be on the right panel to sign the health certificates, be able to assess your horse and your facilities so it can meet the health requirements, but more importantly, actually be prepared to complete the health certs. There are blood tests that need to be completed by the government laboratory. The government laboratory have been under pressure because there's such an uptake in the testing required. And then you need to decide whether you're going for a short period, just for a show of up to 90 days. Sounds like a long time, but currently the festivals that go on in the Mediterranean are long, and people do travel for that period of time. And then what information do we need as a shipping agent? We need to know number of horses, number of trucks, and the approximate date you want to travel. And we really do need this 3 weeks prior to travel to make sure that we can get as much in place as possible to make sure we can meet your deadlines. Which sea crossing do you want to take? Generally, it's going via Dover to Calais over that short strait. We need your vet's details, and we'll need to check with your vet that they are able to meet the requirements and the deadlines that are laid down. How long will your horses be staying there? As we've already discussed, that depends on the paperwork that needs to be issued. We need to have clear copies of the passports of each horse. We need to know values of the horses and the equipment travelling, because customs documents need to be issued. The registration of vehicles, the length, and the number of people travelling. But on top of that, the vehicles have to be inspected by an EU body to make sure they meet the requirements to go to Europe. They were perfectly fine to go to Europe on the 29th and the 30th of December, but all of a sudden they're not. And someone on that vehicle should also be have the qualification, the EU qualification for the equine certificate of professional competence, which can be done online in Europe and in Ireland and other European countries. In the past, we've been able to just get on the lorry, have the vet produce a couple of pieces of paper for us, and then load it up with what we need. That's no longer the case. So our feed and bedding can no longer be taken for the entire period. We are allowed to take feed and bedding for the period of the journey, and there are debates on how long that period can be. But also, if you want to take more than that, a photosanitary certificate may be required, and also various declarations and certificates of origin. We recommend now that people take a certificate of origin for the hay and shavings and feed that they take, and also an invoice, just so they can show that to the customs official if required. I think probably the biggest problem we have now is really not only the welfare, but also the massive increase in costs. The vet now has to complete between 11, 33, 66, 99 pages of health certificate. Originally, that health certificate was just 4. And the time taken to do that is massive. It's taking them away from what they're actually their passion is of looking after horses, to becoming a bureaucratic paper signing and stampers. And that health certificate can take up to an hour to prepare on the first instance. But that certificate probably has to be done between 2 and 3 times. First of all, a draft, and then a second draft, and then the final certificate. There's a massive increase in burden and time on the shippers, because the amount of paperwork that needs to be reduced, the amount of documentation that needs to be gathered is huge. Documentation has to be provided and drawn up. And then the cost of the French border control in this case is also large. You have to go through a border control post, which has to be paid for. The vet checks have to be paid for. There's documentation that has to be paid for. So there's an increase of approximately around 600% on various crossings. I know Simon will refer to that shortly in his own presentation about shows. When returning to the UK, it's much simpler. There's no testing or residency required. A copy of the health certificate, if you can get the correct one issued in Europe, does need to be sent to the shipper, so it can be uploaded onto the DEFRA website or DEFRA portal, so that they can check it if required. And there are also customs requirements that need to be met, both in Europe and on arrival in the UK. Currently, there's no border control post in the UK, but as of July, there are supposed to be border control posts installed, which all horses will have to go through. And this again will increase the cost and will increase the time of the journey. So in reality, what does this mean? It means there's a much higher level of communication required between the shipping agent, the client, the vet, and the border control posts. Time consuming and costly. The shipper is relying, and the client is relying very heavily on the vet and the staff in the vet office to make sure that the papers are issued correctly, accurately, the 33 to 99 stamps that are required and signatures are all in the right place, the crossings out are in the right place, and that they can meet the tight deadlines and be available to change at the last minute if required. The schedules to cross the channel to get through the border control post can't generally be confirmed until around 8 to 12 hours, sometimes 24 hours before shipment, purely because we're waiting for feedback from the French vets to make sure that all the paperwork is correct. And even if they are correct, it's going to take between 2 and 8 hours, potentially longer, at the border control post to get the horses checked. When I say horses, it's not actually a horse check, it's more a paperwork check. So the welfare of the horse isn't really what is being looked at, or the disease status of the horse. It's more making sure that the boxes are ticked and that we can meet the requirements laid out on the health certificate. There have been situations where the horses have been denied boarding onto the boat, despite, we think, having the correct paperwork, and also situations where horses have actually been returned from France back to the UK because papers have been put in the wrong order, or there has been a signature in the wrong place, or not a signature in the right place. So the future. We are where we are, and it will continue to be Brexit, United Kingdom and Europe. It doesn't mean that we are against them, because at the end of the day, we are friends, we're colleagues, and we all work together. And we all have a passion for the welfare of horse, the competition of the horse, and we need to make sure that the movement can continue. There is a lot of work going on to try and reduce the burden upon us all for the health certification and simplify the amount of paperwork that's required. DEFRA are working very hard with their counterparts in Europe to improve the domestic applications and the paperwork, the issuing, and the amount of documents that are required. We're working with all our international friends and colleagues, the equestrian federations, the shows, the FEI, to make sure that the border process can be improved and help where we can to produce better documentation and reduced amount of documentation. We need to look to improve the number of trucks that can go through, or horse boxes that can go through the border control post, because it's currently limited. The border control posts are currently only open between 8:30 and 6, 7 days a week. But generally, all our colleagues want to travel at overnight when it's cooler and there's less traffic. And I think we have to realise that we're in the winter now, which is good because the temperatures are low. But when it comes to the summertime, it really won't be acceptable for our horses to be sitting on the docks for even half an hour, let alone 8 hours, because that heating sun beating down on a vehicle is just going to be a welfare crisis. I think everyone's aware of that. It's just a case of speeding the process and making sure that we can get through as quickly as possible. So I have this, you won't be wondering why this picture's here, but this is what I construe now really as the past. We have a sleek, good-looking, fuel-efficient lorry that's been built for both human and horse welfare. It's comfortable, it's swift, and that's what we've all been striving to do over the last decades to make sure the movement of horses is exactly that, efficient and welfare-orientated and quick. But are we now going to be going back to this, the past? Is this the future, whereby we're putting horses back on trailers, where welfare isn't paramount? The welfare of the horse isn't the number one key. The swiftness of our movement isn't the number one key. The welfare and happiness and contentment of the humans is also not key. Hopefully, that's not the case. And I think with the support of all of us and the dedication and open communication, that won't be the past. Well, sorry, that won't be the future. That will be the past. And we'll be able to return to happy, fast, efficient, and cost-effective movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. Our final presentation comes from Simon Brooks-Ward, the Chairman and Chief Executive of the HPower Group, who run the Royal Windsor Horse Show and Olympia, the London International Horse Show, amongst others. Thanks, Simon.
Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for having me at this conference. I think the National Equine Forum this year is really good agenda and some really crunchy things to look at. One of them, and I think this is particularly important and where we're failing consistently, is how we address diversity and inclusion, particularly in regards to the BAME community. And actually in HPower, we're committed to doing something ourselves, and the next person that will be into horsepower either as an intern or an employee, I hope very much will be attracted from the BAME community. Small steps mean a lot, and we all need to take some. But that's just a comment, really. I've been asked here to represent the events post-COVID and particularly post-Brexit. Coming out of COVID is one thing, and we've all suffered as event organisers this year, and it's really sad to see that Badminton this year has been cancelled for the second year running. But it's our departure also from the European Union, which is making a very damaging effect on our industry. And boy, oh boy, has the rubber hit the road since January. There are so many routes and plans out of this mess with the called COVID, and then comes the first reports from the riders trying to reach the Sunshine Tour. From relative inertia at the beginning of the year to disbelief to anger and dismay. Royal Windsor Horse Show will be one of the first international horse shows off the grid this year, I'm glad to say. And as you probably noted in the recent press, we're moving to early July. Your previous speaker gave us the unenviable news from Pedens that to move the same amount of international horses would see an increase of 483%. It's not only the money, but it's also that it could put off European competitors from travelling here if they have to face delays and potential horse welfare issues. So it does have a real effect on us. The question is whether, if the situation continues, do we have an international equine event industry beyond it? The answer is that long term is unsustainable. National events, yes, but actually big international events, it's going to be difficult with that level of increase in cost and also the welfare issues of delays. So we have to do something about it if we are to sustain our industry. And as I keep saying, this is coming back on the back of COVID. So it's a double whammy. But why does it matter that we do succeed? I guess all of us who operate international shows are the shop window of an industry that is worth billions to the UK economy, with a workforce of 270,000 and an estimated 27 million people connected or actively participating in riding. And I know Claire Williams has said this, and it is a beta figure, but it's really important to emphasize, because when you compare this to the much fated fishing industry, and yes, they need their lobbying, strong lobbying in place as well, but their contribution to the UK economy, according to the Office for National Statistics, is under £500 million, not the 8 billion that the horse world and the racing world brings to the equine industry and to UK PLC. And they employ 180,000 people in fishing. So you can see the comparisons are enormous, but one is political and one is not. But what can we do about it? Well, we could blame everybody and anybody, but actually we are where we are and we have to play the cards in front of us, don't we? It does affect us, all our livelihoods, our lifestyle and our fun if we can't get it right. And at this point, I would like to say a thank you to the British Horse Council. It actually did get ahead of the game before Christmas, before any of us woke up to the ramifications of all of this. And they've been liaising with DEFRA to try and bottom out the problems. And thank you to Joan Rogers, particularly, who's been part of that process. I chaired a group of interested folks who from various backgrounds, Pippa Funnell, Peter Charles, Dickie Waygood, Richard Davison, etc. And we met up with DEFRA recently. It is clear to us and to me that civil servants are not the issue here. They are there to enact their political masters' policies, and they cannot influence the debate in Europe, which is where it needs to be. They are not the blocker. They are entirely sympathetic, but they are dealing with a Neue machine, not minded to be helpful to the UK at the moment. So what do we do about it? Well, there needs to be a plan. The first guiding principle, I feel, is that together we are a force to be reckoned with racing, veterinary practices, sport horses and the breeding industry. We are strong. Individually, we are just a distraction. The second guiding principle, I feel, having gone through that meeting and other meetings since, is that to create a satisfactory income, the real solution will come from the EU and our friends within it. They have a big dog in the fight too. Their industries are the same, similar sizes to our own. So what next? Following my meeting with DEFRA, there are 3 stages to go through, we feel, concurrently to ensure speed and to get a result. Some of what I'm about to say comes from my job in the Ministry of Defence, where as the senior Armed Forces reservist, age only. I have civil servants working for me, and I deliver regular ministerial briefings. So I understand some of the contacts that I'm going to talk about. Step one, understand we need to be one body, one equine business and welfare community, which is collectively powerful and forces the issues and challenges onto agendas in the UK government and throughout the EU, in order that quick wins and sustainable long-term solutions can be found. This body and voice is to provide the main focus of activity and lobbying and be responsible of all representative groups and members. So stage one is to understand what it's all about. A lot of good work has been done on this already, so this should be relatively quick. We need to understand what other industries, food, fishing, whatever, farming industries, what lessons they've learned and what they're doing about it, what the equine industry collectively has done already, what organisations are in contact that represent the sectors of our industry, what organisations are not in contact with government that represent a sector of the community, what are the common issues, problems, challenges, and how we can combine this to greatest effect. Step two, I would suggest, is to shape it. We need to have a coordinating conference of all the representative bodies and organisations to sell the vision. We need to get some money into the kitty. With money, we can get a lobbying firm and company to help us deliver on our needs. None of us, we're the best one in the world, we all have interests, but we've also got complete focus in our businesses at the moment. And we don't have the bandwidth to really do it ourselves in the manner it needs to be done. We need money and we need people to help us out. And we need to identify and appoint good spokespeople within the equestrian community to carry the message forward, as they are doing in fishing, farming, and everywhere else. And then there is stage three. We need to act. One campaign, coordinated, cohered, collective responsibility, and a really good lobbying firm, I would suggest, to hit hard where it matters. And where it matters is to get it up to the ministerial priorities in this country. So it is a political piece. And also we need to actually affect change amongst our EU friends and allies. So that is a suggestion, and maybe we can talk about it later on in the plenary session. But just to say thank you very much indeed. It's really important that we as event organisers have a slight voice in this. We're trying our best, as I say, to be a shop window, and we need to create the shop window in order that we can have a livelihood, that we can have fun, and that we can have a sustainable industry going forward. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you to all our speakers. We've had three fascinating talks from Claire, Henry, and Simon. We have had a number of questions come in, and I'm going to group these as best I can rather than dealing with every individual one. So my first question, which I'm going to put to all of you, but perhaps Henry can start. What do you think the overall impact of Brexit is going to be on our industry? Do you see positives as well as negatives?
The first one you use stress. I don't do stress, but it's beginning to happen. I'm slightly struggling to look at the positives at the moment because we are spending so much time on paperwork and costs. I'm sure there will be a positive there somewhere. It's just a case of finding it. But the impact is definitely currently for transport-wise is the wallet and the time taken, and it's obviously, if it's the wallet, people are less likely to travel both into and out of the UK. So it's going to have a massive impact on our competitions and breeding as well as just general day-to-day operations. Okay,
Claire, what about you? What about your sector?
Yeah, the time that it's added to everybody's daily lives is one of the ones. Like Henry, financial implications, the biggest immediate impact is on the movement of goods. which is excruciating slow, if at all. Shipments that were sent from the UK at the beginning of January in some cases have still not appeared at the customer on the continent, or they've been sent back. So people are facing increased costs in terms of transport, as well as the actual increased costs of custom entries and duty payments. And then there's the on flow from that in terms of potential loss of sales, with people not wanting to wait for goods or looking for easier options. So equally, we are slightly struggling with the positives at the moment. Longer term, as the new markets open up, Minette spoke earlier about the new trade agreements with countries such as New Zealand, Australia, the Pacific Rims, that will open new opportunities. But currently, we're just struggling to get through day to day to get goods both to Europe and out of Europe on a daily basis. So it's just the time it adds to everybody's business lives that's the biggest immediate impact.
And do you expect that to go on long term?
No, people are settling into a new routine. People are getting used to the documentation. They're understanding what's needed, as long as our European partners stay consistent in what they're asking and don't change what they're asking. It will get better, but we thought in early January it would get better a lot faster than it has done. We thought by March things would be getting better. They are, but at a much slower rate.
Okay. And Simon, what about your perspective? What do you think the overall impact of Brexit is going to be on the industry?
I think that's a question we can't truthfully answer at the moment. But if you have a look at it in the short term, you can see that our problem running international events is getting the riders and grooms into this country. You know, it's not just a question of the paperwork and the process; it's also perception as well. You know, we have a channel between us and the continent. That's always been a slight barrier to getting athletes into this country, and it just becomes a whole lot worse with this particular position. You know, where we find also, you know, our trade stands from the EU coming in, displays from the EU coming in. It all affects our sort of ecosystem in terms of what we've got. My fear for the future is that what we don't want to happen is our homebred international athletes disappearing to the continent with their horses and the bloodlines following them, because that will be a real drain on us, where the national scene will weaken. We will have disconnects with our national riders, and therefore with the pinnacle of the sport, and we need to keep that going. In fact, we need to do more to build it. If I was an optimist, and I am, I see this resolving itself, but it's going to be a very painful process as we go along this journey, and it's not going to be a quick win. But I think that if we looked at our own scene now as developing our own national scene in county shows more, which was sliding away, building a very much a bigger national picture of events and competition. I think that's an opportunity now that we need to look at. But in short, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but it's quite serious at the moment.
Yeah, I fully appreciate the lack of crystal ball. Following on from that, and you've already partly answered, what are the areas that you think we should be focusing on to try to improve the situation? Simon, I'll come back to you first.
Well, I mean, I said it in my short speech or whatever, is that, you know, nothing comes without money. You know, we need to get a fighting fund together to develop a very cohesive and proactive lobbying campaign, as they have in the fishing industry, the food areas and everything else, in order that we can compete on the same basis for ministerial lobbying. And I noticed that there was a question in Parliament yesterday from Caroline Noakes, who used to be the chief executive of the Pony Club. You know, we've got lots of allies in Parliament and the ministers, the Lords, but we need to cohere the argument and cohere our lobbying. And if we don't, we will just be firing off in all directions. So that's my plea, and we've all got to invest in it.
Henry, would you agree with that?
Completely. I think that from an equine side, and I've said this to a few people before, I think it's slightly embarrassing that we haven't been out in the press. There's been very little other than the small publications, but there's nothing in the national press about how the equine industry is struggling. But we all know about the fish. We all know about food being held up. And I think that this is what we really need to press for. I believe that there is traction in the EU to work together. Certainly, we have some very good contacts in the EU. We're talking, daily with them, and they're keen to help us and work with us. It's also the governing body in the FEI. But we need to be working together. And we also, there's a lot of information out there that isn't entirely accurate. And I think the key to getting this right and moving forward is accurate information, rather than little snippets from here and there that a rumour's heard here and a rumour's heard there, and that becomes fact. There's a lot of inaccurate information out there, and we can, if we work together, and recently there's been some good meetings about working together, but we need to be one industry, very much one industry.
Claire.
Yes, I'd absolutely endorse both Simon and Henry's comments. Certainly from our angle, we're also talking to fellow trade associations with related issues, and working together is absolutely key. So we're talking to the agricultural feed, the pet feed, and the additives industries to equally join together to lobby, because we all share the same problems when it comes to, for example, the importing of feed, the exporting of feed, or the raw materials that go into them. So I think it's the working together that's of primary importance, both learning from each other and learning from other industries.
Okay, thank you. Moving tack slightly, both Willie Mullins and Aidan O'Brien, who travel lots of horses between the UK and Ireland, have said they're optimistic that things will settle down and that part of the problem is COVID related rather than Brexit. Do you share that optimism? Henry, I'm going to come to you first again.
I think they will settle down, and certainly the trade between Ireland and the UK is buoyant, but a struggle. I mean, we're at the beginning of the breeding season now for thoroughbreds, and in the past you could literally put your horse or your mare in the back of a lorry and drive it straight to stud, get it covered, and go straight back again. Now that doesn't happen anymore. But the Irish are being very accommodating at the border, but yet they are ruled by Brussels. This is the thing. So it's not an Irish problem. It's an EU problem. It's not a UK problem. It's an EU problem. The whole thing comes down to it. So whilst the Irish would like possibly just to go back to that version of putting their horse in the lorry and driving across, it's not something they can do. There will be a solution, albeit, as Simon's already said, it's going to be financial. But there will be a solution, and it's certainly getting easier. People are beginning to understand better of how it works, but it's putting an immense amount of pressure on all the customs agents around the country, and all the vets around the country, including the veterinary laboratories and the government vets, because everything has to have a piece of paper, or 9 or 10 or 20 or however many pieces of paper it may be. So Simon's an optimist. I'm definitely an optimist as well. And yes, we will find a solution to it, because that's what we are. That's the country to a certain extent as well. We are built of our own solutions, and it's going to take time. But everyone's working together. We'll do it. We will do it.
Great. Moving on. What's the position between a country such as Switzerland and the EU, and why is that not the same as for the UK and the EU? Who would like to take that one?
Well, I'm very happy to take this. Sorry to jump in, but this is one of the classic things that keeps on coming up. During the negotiations, people talked about the Norway, Switzerland option, the Canadian option, all these different options. There are different agreements. We have not got that agreement that Switzerland has with the EU, and I'm not going to be political about it, but with the agreement that Switzerland have, there are certain things that they have to meet and conform to. The UK, I don't think we're prepared to meet those options, the same with Norway. And maybe further down the line, we can get to something similar, and I hope we would do, because at the end of the day, on the 31st of December, we were a clean country with exactly the same health regulations as the EU. But then suddenly on the 1st of January, we were a filthy country, and we have got different diseases. I mean, I'm being slightly facetious, but yeah, that's what's happened. We voted to leave, rightly or wrongly, that's irrelevant. That's where we are, and now we have to live with the consequences of that and work our way through it. But it's not a case of because Switzerland can do it, we should be able to as well. That's what we have to try and agree to and work towards. And I'm sure we're all trying to do that, very much so. That would be a brilliant and easy solution.
Claire, do you want to add anything to that from a trade perspective?
And not really. Henry summed it up very, very well. It's all down to the negotiated terms of the agreement. And Switzerland has a different relationship and a different deal with Europe than we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon, I've got one for you that you've already partly covered, but how do you think this will impact on international competition long term? You have said that you're worried some of our young talent may decide to go to Europe, but do you want to expand on that?
Not really. I mean, I will in regards to, I think that what we are looking at is a very nervous industry out there right now, who are looking at the border as a major barrier to come in, and for those that need to compete on the continent, because that's where the money is. I mean, if you look at us in show jumping or dressage, I can't speak on behalf of eventing, but if you have a look at us in show jumping and dressage, we are absolutely minimalistic in terms of our international shows that we've got. We've got, you know, the Hicksteds, the Olympias, the Windsors, the yada yada yada. But we haven't really got the length and breadth of the European community, European Union. So actually, the point being is that people are much more attracted to the continent right now, and if they can't easily get backwards and forwards, they're going to stay there, and so are their horses, and that's a big problem for us.
Thank you. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but I've got a very quick question for all of you. Are there any aspects of this that can be positive? And the questioner has suggested disease control as an example. So in 30 seconds each of you, can you see any positives? Claire, you first.
Disease control isn't so much our bet in terms of the trade. Positives would be new export markets. That would be the long-term positive. Thank you.
Henry?
Yeah, we have control of our borders now, whereby we can decide, we can make our own health requirements up. However, I think that we had a pretty robust system beforehand. And there's a lot of work to be done, but yes, so from a positive side, we could possibly control our borders better and stop horses from coming in, but actually I think we could probably do before anyway. So there's always a positive to everything. It's just sometimes you have to scratch a bit harder to find it.
And Simon?
We have to pedal a little bit harder. That's the positive, and we have to make it work for us. And I think in terms of the positive, it must be that we need to really get hold of our national scene and make that really speak and work for all the riders and competitors in this country.
That's great, thank you. Just to wrap up, I've got one comment that I would like to read out. Simon, thank you for recognising the underrepresentation of Black and ethnic minorities participation within our sector, and to HPower for encouraging the AME to apply for employment within your organisation. That's a very positive step forward. So I thought it was worth recognising that. We're pretty much out of time, but I'd just like to thank all three of you, Henry, Simon and Claire, for fascinating presentations and for answering the questions so comprehensively. Thank you.
Thank you very much.